Welcome to the 2022 Radical Educator Speakers Series. My name is Mari Gray, and I'm faculty in the Department of Educational Leadership. This year's theme is Putting Abolitionist Leadership to Work. Maria Layson will offer a land acknowledgement.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. My name is Maria Layson, and I'm a first-year Doctor of Education student. And this is Cal State East Bay's land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that while we gather at Cal State University, East Bay, located in Hayward, California, we are gathered on the ethno-historical tribal territory of their intermarried Halkeen Irgun Chochenyo Ohlone speaking tribal group, who were the direct ancestors of some of the lineages enrolled in the Muwekma Ohlone tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area, and who were missionized into missions San Francisco, Santa Clara, and San Jose. It is of great importance to acknowledge the significance of this Holshe-Washrep, beautiful land, to the indigenous Muwekma Ohlone people of this region. We ask everyone who visits or attends Cal State East Bay to be respectful of the Aboriginal lands of the Muwekma Ohlone people, and consistent with their principles of community and diversity, strive to be good stewards on behalf of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, on whose land you are their guests. In this acknowledgement, please consider contributing to the Shumi land tax. The word Shumi means gift in the Ohlone language, Chochenyo. With the Shumi land tax, we can help rematriate and return this land to the Ohlone. We would fund the building of community gardens, community centers, and ceremonial spaces so that current and future generations of Indigenous people can thrive on their ancestral land. Thank you all. And I'll pass the mic to Dr. Eric Haas, Director of the Educational Leadership Doctoral Program.
Thank you, Maria. I'm Eric Haas. I'm a professor in the Department of Ed Leadership and Director of the Doctoral Program. Welcome to our first presentation for our Radical Educator Speaker Series this year, 2022. This is now our 5th year of providing these forums and presentations, and we're very excited to start this year. The work we're doing today and the presentation today develops directly out of our 5 social justice principles, which are the power of transformative language, the transformation of systems, empowering minoritized perspectives, community solidarity, and critical reflection. This is what makes up the foundation of our work here in the Department of Educational Leadership at Cal State East Bay. In addition, we're also beginning to develop a definition of abolitionist leadership. And we are complementing our 5 social justice principles with these principles and practices of abolitionist leadership. All of this work results from the activities and the input and the energy and creativity of a number of people, most notably our Abolitionist Leadership Work Group Collective, of which we have a number of names here and a number of its members here today. In addition, I also want to acknowledge the support of our department chair, Dr. Ardella Daly, and the support of our Dean of the College of Education and Allied Studies, Dean Robert Williams. Their support is very necessary and very important to our success. So with that in mind, I want to turn this over to Winnie Quofi and Stacy Southern for their Abolitionist Work Group Collective welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening for our speaker series on behalf of the Abolitionist Leadership Working Group. I'd want to once again acknowledge the continued work of our definition of abolitionist leadership. I'm going to go through and read the current iteration of our definition, which is the hard work of the collective. Abolitionist leadership recognizes that schools are microcosms of an anti-Black carceral society, and that carcerality structures every part of our educational system. These carceral structures create dehumanizing conditions and have material bodily consequences for Black children. Abolitionist leadership seeks to disrupt and dismantle the carceral state, and in its place, create school structures and practices that center, love, and affirm the full humanity of Black children and the Black community. Ultimately, abolitionist leadership seeks the universal, collective emancipation of Black communities and all oppressed peoples. And now I want to pass it over to one of our other collective members, Winnie Kofi.
Thank you, Stacy. My name is Winnie Kofi. I'm a first-year doctoral student, and I wanted to just add to what my collective Stacy said by reaffirming why we're here today. We're here because we want to dismantle, disrupt the white supremacist educational structures that reinforce the school to prison pipeline. We want to reimagine and create new systems which will lift up Black joy and work with communities to build a better educational system. Why is this important? It is important because Black joy matters. This is important because Black bodies matter. This is important because Black children matter. And this is important because we have hope. That's why we do this work. And I will pass this to another collective, Rachel.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Rachel Batania, and I have the honor and privilege of joining you all this evening as a guest on Ohlone land. I am a light-skinned Black woman originally from Philadelphia. I am a mother. I am an educator. I am a lifelong learner. My pronouns are she, her. And I want to take this opportunity to open space in the chat so that we can acknowledge and welcome all of your layered and intersectional identities at this time. So please feel free to add as much or as little as you like in the chat so that we can honor your presence with us here this evening.
Teach us. I know why you would like to bring us down. Because we have all the dirt.
Hi, my name is Mel Potts. I'm a second-year doctoral student in the Department of Education. I'm going to be reading In Lac Ek, which is inspired by Luis Valdez Mayan poem Pensamiento Serpentino. In Lac Ek, tú eres mi otro yo. You are my other me. Si te hago daño a ti, if I do harm to you, me hago daño a mí mismo. I do harm to myself. Si te amo y respeto, if I love and respect you, me amo y respeto yo. I love and respect myself. Thank you. And now I will pass the mic to Revolutionary Rika.
Thank you, Mel. I have the privilege of introducing our speaker for the evening. And so in the summer of 2017, my mentor, former director and executive director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission, Dr. Cheryl Evans Davis, invited the genius that is Dr. David Stovall to speak to our high school and transitional age youth enrolled in our summer youth workforce program. From the moment I first heard him, I was captivated by his authenticity to speak into the reality of the lives of our young people living on the margins of society. He empowered them through his words, which moved beyond the moment and impelled them and us to action. In 2018, I was able to sit at his feet once again when my organization, Collective Impact, was invited to participate in a series of sessions at AERA in New York, focusing on the power of partnerships. On the final day, Dr. Stovall was a panelist highlighting the school, community, and family partnerships supporting Black success. The panel examined the impact that family and community engagement have on learning. The panelists discussed challenges and successes in developing strategies and creating opportunities that include family and community as co-educators, and recognize the importance of integrating youth interest, culture, and voice. Dr. Stovall's paper, Fighting Without Fear, Critical Race Praxis as Struggle and Resistance for Self-Determination, validated the stories of people of color in the US and the larger world. In his own words, it is critical for the activist scholar to intentionally engage the political exercise of claiming space to tell our story. I was elated to see him on the roster for the Radical Educator Speaker Series in January 2021. He highlighted the reality of abolitionist leadership. There can be no fear when attempting to do this work. Once you start, the heat will come. Dr. Stovall is a professor in the departments of Black Studies and Criminology, Law and Justice at the University of Illinois at Chicago. His scholarship investigates 3 areas: critical race theory, the relationship between housing and education, and the intersection of race, place, and school. I could go on and on about his work and accomplishments. However, there is not enough time to do justice to all that he has contributed to the field and society. And so I would like to introduce to some and present to others the speaker of the hour, Dr. David Stovall.
Beautiful child, oh, you're the one.
Sound like thick plaid swinging and sneaky uncles. Look like Tyler Perry making money. Sound like Hayden, feel frustrating, don't it? Like they don't get it. Like they won't ever get it, huh? Like push the personal feelings of racial injustice so far.
Well, thank you so much, Sister Chambers, and thank you to folks at Cal State East Bay. And thanks for, jumping us off with a little bit of Tank and the Bangers. The name of that song is Black Folk. And I think it's really important to engage that process and to talk about these things in a way that is unflinching, but is also keyed into understanding the necessity of intent and joy. So thank you all for even inviting somebody like myself, because in these days and ages, I am more used to being uninvited than to be invited. And again, my name is Dave Stovall. I come to you all from Chicago, the land of the Council of Three Fires, where Indigenous people created a coalition to fight white supremacy. And I think it's important to say that because in that coalition, it was the recognition that there will be numerous fights against colonization. There will be numerous fights against the colonial project. There will be numerous fights against what people are trying to do in the world in the claiming of our humanity. And I think when we talk about it in that way, it becomes clear for us to do our work, not just because it's what we're connected to, but also because there is an imperative to do it. Right now, My conversation with you all tonight is not a friendly one. And what do I mean by that? And I think it's important for us to start with that because we're in this moment. And if you're in schools, particularly K-12 spaces, and even some spaces in higher ed, you understand how real it is right now, right? And for all of you all in California, even though you have an ethnic studies mandate, they're still coming for you because what they figured out is that they'll take over school boards, right? And then make it more difficult for you to actually engage your process, even though it's on the books that ethnic studies has to be taught. It's also going to remind you that even in the struggle for ethnic studies, there was an attempt to eliminate particular perspectives, and many of the authors of the original curriculum removed their names from it because of its capacity and strategy to take certain groups up while lifting up others, particularly I mentioned the controversy around any discussion of Palestine, right? And I think we have to say those things because if we don't, we let them become erased by the larger society, right? And we don't make this claim to the historical record. And I think when we talk about this particular moment that we're in, as we come out of COVID, and that COVID has exposed what many of us have already known, and what many of you have already known, that the United States is a land founded on slavery, genocide, and settler colonialism in the form of white supremacy, right? These are foundational principles to the United States. I'm not saying anything new. I'm saying this according to the documents that actually govern this land, like the Constitution, right? So this thing around not being dismissive of these things, but really understanding them, right? So we are actually in 3 pandemics, and pandemic just means a trouble or concern across region or nation, right? We associate it with health, but pandemic just means that trouble across region or nation. So we are in the 3 pandemics of capitalism, white supremacy, and COVID-19. And when we are clear about those 3 pandemics, we also need to get clear around what it is that we need to do, right? Because we use some troubling language in the States today, right? You know, you hear all these people saying things like, I can't wait to get back to normal. And I'm always saying, well, if we paid attention, we would see that that normal was problematic because it was still something rooted in slavery, white supremacy, and settler colonialism, right? And it's not to imbue you all with some type of morbidity, right? It's not to depress you, but it's really to say, look, what is it that we're in? And now with the current pressures that are coming on schools, we need to be clear about what this onslaught is. And what we see in history is that the folks or the naysayers or the people who lift up white supremacy, they told us this was coming, but we didn't collectively believe them. And now many folks are kind of backpedaling or kind of caught because they caught this punch, right? And now they've caught this punch in the face unsuspectedly. And now they have to ask another question in terms of what is it that we're in? Because the thing that we're in is something that we've been in for a long time. And that's the fight for accuracy in the historical record. And that is a fight against white supremacy. That is a fight against patriarchy. That's a fight against sexism. That's a fight against transphobia. So now when we start to think about these particular things, we can't run from this, y'all. You are in a fight There's no questions about this. There's nothing nice about this, right? I don't have anything to say, well, oh, you know, they brought roses to the fights. No, they didn't. They brought everything humanly possible to dislodge, distract, indemnify, and further demean you. So now the question becomes, what are you willing to do? And now, how, in doing that thing that you decided, how are you willing to come to grips with some things that we've known for quite some time? And I don't say this to you all as somebody who is distanced from this, right? I say this to you all as somebody who is grappling with this, right? I live in a city where last year we had 813 homicides, right? We also have closed the most schools in the history of the United States for one single city. We have also lost 250,000 Black people in Chicago since 2000, right? So now there are schools in my city where it costs more to keep the lights on than it does to pay for faculty and staff. So now when we start to think about this,
no, it's not.
in real time, now we have to remove and understand that we're in something that's calling into question not only something that we've known, but also what it is that we are trying to do. And let me give you all an example of it. Many of you all are teachers who have worked in K-12 schools. Many of you all have been in professional developments, and you have said to yourself, what a professional development is going on, right? Sometimes these PDs, and no shade to the folks who may have to run these PDs, but we got to be honest. Sometimes those professional developments have you envision engaging in harmful acts against other folks, right? They are so frustrating because you know, as a classroom teacher or a person in a schoolhouse, that thing they're putting forward is not going to work. So now, what are we willing to do? Because the only thing COVID did was kick up what we've already known. It showed how deep the cast is around what is provided for folks. We see very clearly who has been made valuable and who has been made disposable. And now we're trying to go back to something that further devalues the young folks in the building who may already be struggling. So if we think about this, and now that the enemy has made good on their promise, we have to say something to ourselves. We've been here before, and only us is going to free us. So now the work is tough. I don't have a lot of nice things to say to you all tonight because you have to fight to make spaces for joy. You are pressed to claim a particular existence because there are people in the world who say you should not have it. There are people in the world who say it is normal, right, and good to think of you as criminal before we think of you as human. And if I think about your criminality first, then your schools, where you are housed, where you work, and the healthcare that you're provided will all look a particular way. So now, when you talk about housing shortages in Northern California, right? Or when you talk about who has had access to healthcare and who hasn't, you see very clearly that the moment before COVID is now only deepened, that we're now in a health pandemic. So now we got to think about this a little bit differently. And for people who are in K-12 schools, I have a particular challenge for you. This is the moment to be as brave as humanly possible, because that attack is here. They promised you that they were coming, and now they have come. There's no running from this. People are getting fired for all these nondescript reasons. And don't think because you have legislation in a particular space that they will not come for you. So now we gotta make a real decision around this difference between education and school. And for the abolitionist group, working group, I also will offer this challenge. You all say that you have a sentence in there about creating school systems. I would challenge you all to shift that to say education systems, because schooling is still this thing around order and compliance, right? Carter G. Woodson talks about this, Jarvis Givens talks about this, Vanessa Siddle Walker talks about this, James Anderson talks about this. So get that school language out of that statement, right? Challenge your thinking around education, because education is the practice of you asking questions of your condition and working with others to change it. Now, when you make that decision, you now have to think about something that Michael Dumas reminded folks of, but we still didn't want to listen. And people like Tiffany Marie Johnson and Candace Watson have also continued that same chain of questions. That's tough. And it's really around whether or not the thing that we call school is redeemable, knowing what it intended to do, right? So I quote Kevin Kumashiro, who says, look, the US schooling system was never meant to educate anyone. So now we have to think about what that process is meant, right? So all of this has been centered around preparing people to work and to be exploited. The moment you start to resist your exploitation and dehumanization, systems of power work to suppress you. Now, as school leaders, you got to ask a different question. Are you part of that process of suppression and compliance to rules? Or are you about something else? Because if you are, you're going to have to rethink what it is that you're doing. So abolition is calling for you to rethink this thing, because you said it in the statement that schools are part of the larger carceral logic. Now, for folks, and I always appreciate clearing this up, because as academics, we can just talk hella long about a concept and never explain the damn thing, right? So let me interrupt that. Let me interrupt that right now, right? So when we say carceral, we're talking about something that is in relationship to prison. It is not something that just reminds you of it, but it uses the same logics. So if young people are wearing uniforms, walking through metal detectors, have particular rulings about what they can do in hallways or not do, have to walk in those hallways with their hands in front, hands behind their back, have silent lunches, those are the exact same logics of the prison. So don't start talking about a school prison pipeline, because I think that's another thing you all have in your statement, and I'll offer another challenge and a reconsideration. We need to talk about a school prison nexus, Depending on where you are reminded that that school and the prison is the same thing. It is not just a place that is preparing you to go to prison, but it uses the same logics of the prison to further suppress any movement towards education. And as school leaders, you gotta confront, face forward with this. Because in too many instances, those who have historically had the least are guaranteed even less. You know what those students look like. You know what race they are. You know what ethnicity they are. You know what social position they hold. You know where they live. So now it becomes critical for you to stop this kind of rationale or excuse making that you use for compliance for the district. You got to be real upfront and say, this is happening to my students. This is happening to my families. This thing that is proposed does not work. This is what works. So now abolition is really asking you the question, should you even be in the place that you're in? Again, y'all, it's funky, right? There's just no way around this. But if we're going to ask questions of our condition, we have to be serious about whether or not you're going to stay in it. And if you're going to stay in it, you have instantaneously committed to a struggle. I guess there's just no way around it. There's no, as my students always say, you can't finesse this one. This is essentially a fight in a phone booth, right? You got 3 square feet with you and your opponent, and somebody got to get out. It is that stark, right? I do not want to engage in this kind of toxic language around physical violence. I don't want to use that as some trope. I want us to understand the seriousness of this, because the violence waged against young people of color in these places called schools often come by the hands of people who say they are committed to justice. So now the commitment to justice must be matched in your action. If you are willing to match those actions, you're going to have to do some things. And one of those things is ask a deeper question around what it is that you do and why you do it. So because I love the kids is not an answer, right? Because that's the quick, and this is the default one that we go to, right? Why do you do? I just love the kid. Nope. We're not taking that one. You got to come back with something else, because you are now being challenged around what it is that you do, not for validation. This is not about validating what it is that you do in particular systems. This is not about being approved by folks to say that you're legit. That is not it. This is about you saying, I am refusing to dehumanize and engage in acts of violence against my students and their families connected to white supremacy in the form of compliance. And that ain't gonna get you a lot of friends. Real talk. So now abolition is not about just tearing something down. Abolition is the commitment to build. And I think that's something else that you all should put in your statement for the abolitionist working group. What are you committed to build, right? You talk about this process of what schools are the microcosm of. Now, if we understand that is unacceptable, if we understand the anti-Black, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Latinx, anti-Asian American Pacific Islander project of school, now we have to say, what is the building of something different? So now you're asking this question. And again, everything that I'm putting forward today, I'm asking of myself, right? I'm not doing this absent in some kind of theoretical space. I'm asking this because we have seen an upheaval here in Chicago. And some of you all have seen upheavals in the East Bay, in the South Bay, in Southern California. So now we got to ask a question: what is it that we are willing to do, knowing this to be real? Now, I'm going to run counter to how many administrators live their lives, right? In administration, people are just kind of sold, you know, we get the bullshit Hollywood story of the principal, the Joe Clark, who just comes into the space and what's wrong with y'all black and brown babies? You just need to pull your pants up, and if you don't, I'm gonna beat you over the head with a bat, and then everything is okay. That's trash. Now, here's what you are challenged to do. You're challenged to think about who are your authentic partners in struggle. Who are the people that you will work with to make sure that violence is not waged on those families' heads? You now have to think about yourself as belonging to a network of justice workers, which really means that you have to find your people. You have to be willing to humble yourself enough to listen. And now, based on what you are hearing, to build out strategies to now work with other people who are in similar conditions. Because the false trope that we give you is that administrators kind of do this lone work. But if you're fighting for justice and if you're fighting against white supremacy, if you're doing this lone wolf work, it's the easiest to clip you off. Now you have to think about who are you in community with, because that enemy is coming. They are at your front door. They told you they were coming. And we still thought we could hide. We still thought if we just kept our cool and stayed fast, that everything was going to be all right. No. White supremacy is only white supremacy-ing. Derek Bell warned folks that mainstream white society will only move toward racial justice to the extent that mainstream white society remains in power. They got shook in the summer of 2020. They saw it and said, look, this thing could go bad quick. So now we have to take back the reins. And what better way to take back the reins than to regulate what you do with young people as a captive audience? That's what all this CRT legislation is. That's what this attack against the historical record is, right? In fact, the folks who are attacking CRT haven't even read the damn thing, don't even know what it is. The real thing is, once you start having your own thought, once you start having a critique, and dare we say, once you start asking questions, the problem starts. So this is really about curtailing and curbing the ability of young people to ask questions of their world that some groupings of adults are afraid to answer. If you say you are committed to abolition, you cannot be one of those people. And if you backslide on this, keep abolition out your mouth. And I think this becomes important because in all these ways, we think about ourselves as navigating this space. You got to take a stand now, y'all. We at this point, there is no turning back. right? So now it's not about gaslighting you all, but saying, no, we're in a serious situation. And if we take it seriously, then we will move in a way that's reflective of that seriousness. So now we have to think about this in a particular way. They told me they were coming. I believed them. So now I'm ready. Abolition is saying, how do you get ready? How are you willing to engage in a practice and process that refuses the normalcy of academic violence on young people of color? When you deny a person knowledge of self, when you deny a person the capacity to engage their world, when you deny a person a right to ask questions, Hakeem Adabudi said, it is like lining up a group of young people and executing them. Again, I don't want to rest in this kind of harsh language. I don't want y'all to leave tonight and be like, damn, Stovall said, this shit is terrible. We all need to just go do something else. That's not it. I want to say explicitly that if you take this thing seriously, and if you understand the attack that is happening on teachers who engage these critical processes, you have to prepare yourselves. Because if you don't, you will not last in this thing. There's no way for you to last. So now, again, what is it that we do? What is the reclamation of joy? Right? It's hard. It's hard to get in that, right? It's hard to think about, you know, all of these things that are happening to us, and then you're like, damn, Stovall, you talking about joy? Who the hell is joyful in this, right? But you got to learn from the lessons that history teach us. If the enemy is able to steal your joy, then it becomes easier for them to steal your mind. So now, in the protection of your mind, body, and spirit, you have to make a claim to joy. And that claim to joy has to be harder than the things that do not bring you joy. Because we're in it, right? And we're trying to support folks because we're all in it. And let's be real, folks are tired. We are beat down and exhausted. And there's no running from that. So now, abolition says there has to be a committee, or a commitment, to replenish ourselves. And you only replenish yourselves collectively. You replenish yourselves when you are committed to now look at others, just like when Mel read the poem, you are my other me. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. But you gotta live that. You gotta be checking for folks. You gotta think about what it means to do this work. You gotta think about who are the folks that you're seeing slipping. You gotta think about the folks that who you see and it's not necessarily good for them. You gotta check in with them. And you have to do that consistently. And now you have to think about, in that place that you call school, what is a pursuit of education? You have to wrestle with that because there's not a lot of clear answers, but we do know what's happening to folks. And now the pursuit of abolition is not a Pyrrhic one. It is one that is grounded. It is connected to something. It is a commitment. And when we don't talk about the things in this way, we miss the point. Because I am very fearful of terms like abolition being co-opted and sanitized. We miss the point. It cannot be this term that becomes a all in the just kind of catch-all. You got to be clear about what it is that you're doing. So now, in your attempt to eliminate the things that are unacceptable, what are you willing to do to build something new? And more importantly, what does that look like in a classroom? What does that look like in a schoolhouse? What does that look like in a community? We're asking a question about reimagining. And reimagining is difficult when the attack is in front of your face. Doing this work is hard when somebody is throwing a brick at your head. Figuratively and literally. The work is hard when your livelihood is being threatened at every given moment and you feel as if you are isolated from any protection. It's a moment for folks, particularly in school leadership, to step up and quit playing. Right? And really recognize that it is hard. And because it's hard, you now have to figure out who are your people and what you will do with them. You got to have real conversations with your family around the work that you're doing. Because it is the most serious now. And when we don't talk about this, I'm worried. I'm deeply concerned that we try to nice our way out of this and the attack still looms. The fight against white supremacy is a struggle in perpetuity. We just go to sleep sometimes. See, the election of the cat who used to live on the south side of Chicago, who became the 44th president, put some of y'all to sleep. Some of y'all thought it was sweet. And you were reminded instantaneously, if you paid attention, by the formation of the Tea Party. If we would have paid attention. Right? Now you get an orange dude and everybody's up in arms, but the orange dude is only the reminder of what this place has always been. A land founded on slavery, genocide, and wrongful land appropriation. And when that thing is threatened, they will move to bring a strongman character to levy false claims and to distract and fool his constituency that he doesn't even really care about. So now we got to think about what this is. And not to be mad about those things past, but to now use that to mobilize us, right? Because if we're not thinking about that in school, when Turning Point USA comes and tries to take over your school board, or a few disgruntled parents try to come through and say something all out of order, you got to step up and ask those questions. Okay, if this is the problem, what do you want to be taught? You got to ask folks when they come at you, accusing you of teaching critical race theory, you got to say, well, what do you understand critical race theory to be? And more importantly, why is it problematic? And why do you understand that this is purportedly teaching young people how to be racist? You have to confront the absurdity. And when you confront that absurdity, that heat is going to come again. That's why you can't be in those spaces by yourself. We have to go back to our grandmother's wisdom, right? White supremacy will always remind you what it is. You better believe it. So now, trust that this attack is one of many. And we're going to have to be serious about how we are prepared, because we've been challenged. It is never about if the enemy is coming. It is about when they are coming, and they have come right now. They are at your front door, but you can't fear them, because the bully operates on fear. Now, you have to demonstrate that you are not afraid of those attacks. You have to build capacity and power to withstand them. And now, when we talk about these particular spaces, we're no longer in this kind of finesse game. We're in a space where we have to challenge ourselves to be fugitive, right? And Michael Dumas always reminds us, he says, fugitivity means that you are not yet free, but you have made a decision to run. You now have to decide where you are running to and who you are running with. And once you have made that decision, you are building out strategies and processes so other people know that you are running. Not running away, but running to. And when we ask those questions, we can do something different. I offer these challenges to you all, not as an expert, but as a struggling educator who deals with this every day, every night in my conversations with folks who are catching it too. I say this to you as a call to rethink what it is that you're doing and to be clear about who you are doing it with. Because if we are, then our work becomes different. But there can be no question about what is happening. And once we're clear about that, the work also becomes clearer. And you must have joy in the face of this hate, as hard as it is. And I don't say that to sound oxymoronic, but I say that to engage us in a practice of thinking about what is our health and wellness? How do we pay attention to our mental health? How do we do that collectively and outside of an experience solely of indulgence? So now, the work is here, y'all. I cannot front, right? It's a whole lot, right? As my students always say, look, it's a whole lot on a whole Monday, right? So that thing around really understanding that, right? So however we get down, we're in this space. That challenge is on us. Let us embrace it, but let us embrace it with a clearer understanding that abolition is not for the faint of heart. It is for the committed. So let me stop there, y'all. Thank y'all for having me. I truly appreciate it. I hope what I'm saying is making sense and offers a challenge that we need to embrace, but also we must look for the people who are embracing it. You know? So thank you.
Beautiful. Wow. Dr. Stovall, thank you so much for sharing these and imparting such wisdom tonight, and for the challenge. I've heard you give us a few challenges that are listed there that that we definitely have to follow up on, and some changes that is the working group that we need to consider as well. And I want folks to take 5 minutes to submit your questions to the Jamboard. We have someone that's going to drop the link in the chat, and you can click on that and begin to write your questions on the Jamboard. In the meantime, I do have some questions that I wanted to ask myself, and there's another person that wants to ask one live as well. And the question that I'd like to start while folks are kind of putting some things on the Jamboard there is how do we bring the youth along with us on this journey? You know, on this journey, this challenge, you know, so that we're also teaching them to build. There's this concept of building Black generational wealth. And so Black generational information and that transfer of information as we move forward, and the best way to do it is that they're right next to us and building with us. And how do we do that? And some suggestions that you might have about how to do that and how to prepare them to reclaim joy. I like what you said, about that. So of course, it's like I'm squeezed in 2 questions in one here. And also how to reclaim joy for them. Our youth, I work in the field of mental health in the schools, and I see exactly what you're saying. The young folks that are just beat up by the system. How do we get in and help them to rebuild, to build and then to have that joy and even fight for that joy, and for some of them joy that they've never had being in school. It's never been there. So I want to stop there and certainly give folks a chance. Don't forget, check that link on the Jamboard, start putting in some of your questions. And that is my question to you, Dr. Stovall. Thank you so much.
Yep, indeed, Sister Cornelia, that thank you for that, because I think the thing that we have to think about education, I would argue, in a little differently. And this is what I mean by this. So many of our young folks disconnect because the school isn't really reflective of their interests, right? So now we have to think about, okay, what are the ways that we can have a space that are reflective of their interests, right? Especially for younger ones, right? So now if there's, because we talk about this all the time, but we don't necessarily do it, right? So if young folks are seeing themselves and we're looking at things that shift our understandings of our world, now we can begin to process it differently, right? So if we think about why, if you're in a space where families are having to move out, now you can ask young folks, well, what do you all see as happening? Now you can begin to think about that practice of what it means to be pushed out or gentrified or displaced, right? You can now engage that vocabulary, but now at the same time, who are the folks who are building issues and concerns around housing? Who are the people who are actively looking at this particular problem? And now we can have a very different set of approaches to address it. As young people get older, another thing that comes up when you're connecting to their interests, now the question becomes, when we're in contact with them, how are we operating to build out plans for them, right? So now how are we actually engaged and saying, okay, well, look, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? How do we now put you in those spaces to do it, right? And then kind of asking that, because that is actually the joy, right? So I see your questions as connected, right? So if a young person is seeing a space where they are valued, appreciated, and loved, then there's the greater chance that they're joyful, right? But we also have to think about the material connection in that, right? It's not just this thing that exists in this kind of etheric hope, right? Hope is a material thing, right? So you have to really start to engage that as a material process. So now, how are we connected to those things that young folks are asking questions about? And now, how are we developing spaces where they can build with others to address those conditions, right? Because the hopelessness comes from not seeing people being able to address those conditions, right? So now how do we get folks into that space to begin to ask those questions, right? And to your point, this is when we kind of have to dislodge from that schooling. I shouldn't say kind of, we have to, right? You dislodge from the schooling thing because it's like, okay, turn to page 48. Well, what the hell is on page 48, right? This thing around like that has no significance to what it is that we're trying to do. And I think that grounded knowledge around that allows us to engage more of a pursuit of education in opposed to just kind of reifying this school, which we know, to your point, isn't necessarily working.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a lot of questions. Myself and my sister Maha are going to tag team here And I believe that Stacy had a question that she wanted to ask, and then I'll turn it over to my sister Mahab right after Stacy. Stacy?
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Dr. Stovall, for coming to speak to us. It's such a rich, such rich words you've shared. I wanted to ask questions about the fire that comes for us. And when it does come, and because you are doing the work and you're not willing to kind of talking vaguely for certain reasons, and you hold ground on certain things that you're not willing to because you see the harm being done. You spoke of maybe you need to go to different places. First of all, I have many questions, but I'm trying to put them in one. Where would those places possibly be to go? And then also, how does that work? Because we have to acknowledge that we do need, we are in a capitalist system and we have to make money and survive. So there's kind of this juxtaposition of the need to survive, but also the need to do work. And so I'm sort of, feeling this constraint between the two. So can you speak a little more on that specifically?
Yeah, this is always, and thank you for that, because I think there are a couple of things that I'm hearing, and you let me know if I'm getting this right. Right, so that those pressures come, and now you have to think about, all right, who am I letting know that this is coming, right? Who is the community of people that I'm letting know that this heat is about to come, right? Because this shifts our understanding of allegiances and networks, right? Schools often position working class families of color as the enemy. And they're in a lot of problem. So now we have to think about that grouping of people are our greatest allies if we are doing right by them, right? So that's always the question. They are our allies if we are doing right by them. So now that network of families, you got to let them know, okay, look, they're coming for me, right? They're coming for me right now. They're coming for me in a particular way. Now, when they do come, if you all let them know how you all feel, that actually is really important for me and my well-being, right? Not just in terms of employment, but in terms of your well-being, knowing that you are not by yourself. Now, there's an interesting moment now in teaching and leadership. Because this is kind of late stage capitalism at its worst, best, depending on who you ask. Now, you got hella openings for teachers, right? So it's not this thing where the gig is threatened in one particular way because you can literally just dip to another space. Now, that's not the best case scenario, of course, but I think it's really important to now challenge us around where our relationships are, right? And how do we activate those relationships under these attacks, right? And to think about this on multiple levels, to think about this at the level of admin, to think about this at the level of teacher, to think about this at the level of paraprofessional, to think about this at the level of student, to think about this as the level of families. So now, if you are doing right by folks, they won't leave you hanging. But you now have to trust those relationships that you have now established. And that's a practice that I think we now are pushed to understand at an even deeper level, right? So now those spaces, those relationships that we've developed over time and space are now the things that insulate us and keep us protected, right? And I think that's really important in this day and age, because the ways in which districts can move, they first move to isolate you, right? You know, they single out your class, then they start picking away, they start picking at your curriculum, they're telling you to post your stuff. And then if you don't post it, now here's our resident, here's our resident communist, here's our resident socialist, here's the person who hates America, you know, all the trash titles, false categorizations that they give you, right? And now what you have to really hold fast to is what it is that you're doing and the network of people who are supporting you, right? I think it's a very different moment, but if we pay attention to history, we see that the myriad of people actually held themselves steadfast by establishing those networks, right? And now is a moment to revisit those strategies, right? I think it's really important in this day and age, and we can't run from that particular reality.
Thank you, Dr. Stovall, for that. There are a couple of questions that I'm going to combine because I think they go hand to hand. So we have a question from the attendees. How do we find our community in this journey? And a follow-up question is, belonging into a network of justice workers, what role do you see co-conspirators do in this journey?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And thank you for that question, Maha, because, that set of questions, because there are a couple of things that happen there. One is thinking about now developing that network. Now, who are the folks that now are in that network? And it's a very simple strategy at first, right? The first strategy is you only go with the folks who do what they say they're going to do, right? Because this is the time, and my young folks always say, you know, here in Chicago, we had a statement about, we call folks ops, right? Who are the opposition, right? So they always, you know, I got a spot out, you know, my young folks are always like, Doc, look, I got a spot out for them ops, right? So that thing, and I like that terminology because it reminds me, right? So who is the opposition? So now, when you think about who are the folks who say, look, if you're doing this, you need to think about this. If you're doing this, make sure you see me. So now we can figure out how to support you in that process. So now that becomes the network of people who has shown up to support you, right? Spiritually and materially, right? So that I think though that's the first part. And then when you talk about co-conspirators, and then I think in that space, talking about white folks who do this action, who do this work, the real litmus is, how do you stand up against white supremacy? It's not just trying to show that you're down with folk of color, but what are you willing to say to power, right? When they show up and you know how they're coming. So now the co-conspirator has to say, look, I know what y'all doing. We go to the same space. We eat in the same spaces. When you are not around this grouping of people, you talk differently, you move differently. So now here's what it means. I worked with a guy named Michael Klonsky here in Chicago, and he said the woman who was opposing some work that we were doing, he pulled her, these are two white folks, he pulled her to the side and she said, Michael, I always feel like you're with them. And he said, I'm deeply disturbed by your racism. Now, are we harboring sentiment that is akin to what your relatives used to do? Or are you your relatives? I was like, oh, he's not playing. he's not playing. And that is the test. The co-conspirator will confront white supremacy unflinchingly, right? And that, I think that's the point, right? Because now you have to be willing to understand how you operate in it. And you have to be clear as to whether or not you agree and acquiesce to the rules of white supremacy, or do you dare challenge it? Right? Because now, and Noah Ignatieff used to always talk about this, right? That's the race traitor, right? The race traitor is saying, nah, I might get hella advantaged by white supremacy, but that's not what we're doing here, right? It's a different set of understandings, right? The work is differently, but I think we have to really be clear about what that justice condition is, what it is that we're trying to build out, and then what processes that we are engaging, and then who will take what roles in that process, right? So it really requires us to organize in a very different way, right? But to learn the lessons of history in terms of that organization.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. And this next question that I have almost falls in line with that one. And it is, how do you propose that we prioritize and value the importance of community partnerships? And there are different nonprofits and community agencies that are out there. And how do you propose that we, begin to build and prioritize those?
Right. And I think this becomes a very important question, because it is very easy to see the grouping of people who are just doing this as a broader charitable exercise. It is a very different looking proposition when the people who are doing it are connected to their community and are actively trying to build something. So now, if you're in a position of school leadership, you got to ask a real question of those quote unquote partners who approach you about doing things. The first question is, why do you do what you do? How do you understand what it is that you do? And for what purpose are you doing it? The other part of that is you have to reframe how you understand families. If families are understood to be your allies, then you engage them differently. You talk to them differently. You are transparent with what you are doing in your classroom. You are transparent about what it is that you are trying to communicate. And the more transparent you are, the more they will see you as someone who is willing to engage their families. You will never know more than what a family does about their young folks than they do. Never, right? So now you have to think about, what is it that you are willing to learn because you are trying to engage folks with the purpose of figuring these things out that could potentially harm everyone in question.
Thank you, Dr. Stovall, for that answer. You mentioned in your presentation the joy, and we have to bring joy. So how do you define joy? And then a follow-up question to that is, how do we build joy into curriculum?
Yeah, and thank you for that. I mean, like, joy for me is really saying, how do you deeply understand and appreciate what a gift it is to do this work, right? And not in some kind of hokey, humble servant type, all the rhetoric that we can put out about folks, but to really say, no, it's a blessing to be able, that I am not the walking dead, right? It's a blessing that I'm willing to engage with folks. It's a blessing to be able to learn from folks about what it is that we're trying to do. Now, the joy comes in, how do we take care of each other, right? And I work with a brother named Asif Wilson, who always says, how are we taking care of each other? Because there is no way humanly possible that we'll be able to do this work if we're not good, right? So now, how are we now starting to take care of it? And some of those things are very simple, right? just checking in with folks, seeing how they're doing, sharing meals, being in community and fellowship with folks, then using that space to transition to the work you're trying to do, right? So now that thing, and now if you think about joy in curriculum, the easiest way to do it is say, okay, what's not working here, right? What is this thing that's not working? And then you say, all right, cool. What in my particular space is going well? What do my students connect to? That is your building block, right? So now when you think about joy, joy comes from what you are paying attention to, right? As being joyful. And now you are willing to expand on that understanding, right? That reality. So I think, again, it's joy, curricular joy, if we could call it that, is really coming from us looking inward to our own practice and now figuring out where the connections are.
Thank you for that answer. We have another that is connected to community. And so we're so often isolated in schools and districts and standing up against this violence. How do you connect in community in this work? And what is the role perhaps of the CUS, it's right here, East Bay, Department of Ed leadership in helping? Like, what role can we have within this department in helping?
Yeah, I think in terms of the Department of Ed leadership, this is always a good thing, but you have to be deathly honest about this thing, right? You got to be deathly honest around what it means to be in a schoolhouse in a leadership position under late stage capitalism and white supremacy, right? You just gotta, that can't come as the additive, right? That can't come like the, well, no, that has to be in the that has to be in the grounding of the classes, right? That has to be a through line, right? In terms of saying like, look, what do you do as a school leader, understanding the purpose of schooling, right? So now it's like, look, if you in a space collecting a check, in some instances a very hefty check, and you know this thing was never meant to work, then what the hell are you doing? Right? I mean, we can't run from that, right? So now we have to be able, I think, for CSU East Bay, Department of Ed leadership, you got to be willing to grapple with that. And you have to be willing to ask very difficult questions of yourself. Because a lot of times, it's easy to project out to systems. It's easier to project out to white supremacy as these overarching issues. But what you got to do is say, nah, here's how we capitulate to that, right? And if we're serious about doing something different, then that is an entirely different set of work, right? So now you have to think about, so CSU East Bay Department of Ed leadership, you all really got to think about what fugitivity looks like, right? Because you got folks in schoolhouses, you got folks in places, district offices that, want to do something, but now you got to figure out what it is that you're trying to do. So you got to lay that out, right? And a lot of times, I think the good thing about that is you can have folks analyze their space, right? They can analyze where it is that they're operating in some leadership capacity or where it is that they're teaching, right? And now begin to unpack that place as practice for if they move into leadership, if they move someplace else and go into something else. So that's a different type of work. And what it also is going to call folks in to do, it's going to call you to bring in school leaders and teachers who are already doing that, right? You got to make space for them. You got to make space for them to talk to other folks, right? Around saying, if you're going to do this, here's what you need to be thinking about. Here's what you need to be doing. Here's how we did it on this side, right? So really kind of thinking about those those practices, right? And if you all go, I don't know if you all as a department put folks in internships in school districts or what have you. If you do that, the pairing is critically important, because you cannot be pairing people with chumps who just ain't committed to a damn thing. Like, you got to be clear about that. Like that's always a thing in teacher ed too, right? You can't pair a young teacher with a whack mentor teacher. It's criminal. Stop doing it, right? So now I think it's really in terms of thinking about that's where the work has its greatest promise, if we think about that intentionally.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stovall. We have so many questions, but we run out of time. And I just want to take just a couple of seconds just to say thank you so much. It's been so informative. And one thing that stands out to me is you pointing out that school to prison is not just a pipeline, but it's actually in the school, that there is a prison system. And that is sticking with me the most. So I appreciate you and I thank you. And now we will hand it over to Dr. Mary Gray to close our session. Thank you.
Thank you, Maha. I echo Maha's sentiment. You know, when we invited David Stovall and we told him what was going on, that some of our students were catching smoke. And what I love about what he said, what he did tonight was he outlined the context and then came all the way to the end with the responses, some real practical things that folks can do. You are a real one, Dr. Stovall, and we adore you. Thank you for your time and your wisdom. I also want to thank Debbie Woods for all of her hard work. Everybody's here because Debbie made sure that we got the links and the emails and everything else. I want to thank Dr. Strom, who made all of the beautiful flyers, inviting folks, and the links on those to tonight as well. The Radical Educator Speaker Series will continue on Wednesday, April 6th with Diana Recouvreur, who is going to give a talk about the connections to the education pipeline, restorative construction toward an abolitionist future. We hope you will join us then, and I want to tell you about some of our upcoming events as well. This Friday, at the CAPIA conference, the Abolitionist Leadership Working Group will be presenting their work on abolitionist leadership praxis. On April 6th, again, we have Diana Recouvreur coming. Someone will drop the link to register for that talk in the chat. And then on April 22nd, our group will be presenting at at AERA. And then finally, on the 27th of April, we'll have our final conversation of the Radical Educator Speaker Series with Dr. Kazu Haga. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming, and have a good night.
Make me so happy, beautiful child. Oh, you're the one.
Sound like thick plaid swinging and sneaky uncles. Look like Tyler Perry making money. Sound like Hayden, feel frustrating, don't it? Like they don't get it. Like they won't ever get it, huh? Like push your personal feelings of racial injustice so far underneath the carpet that you trip over your own family history. But I love me some black folk. I love the hair grease and the rental fees, the front row seats, the police, the projects, the mustard greens, being late, social security checks, government assistance, bougie, black, looking good, bags of hair, fake press on nails, rat tail comb, stunting gold chain, gold teeth, black men and big feet. I love me some black folk. For they are the people that were made from the darkest parts of the sky.
Smile like your mama, eyes like the sun. Beautiful child, oh, you're the one. Fly like your daddy, make me so happy. Beautiful child, oh, you're the one. I'm in a place when I see your face. must be nostalgia. I'll never forget the day that we met. Beautiful child.
Black don't crack. I love your skin. I don't see that from other kin. It's today, any day. I see me and mine doing different things, pushing boundaries. West Coast, East Coast, overseas.
From the 504, what you think I came to LA for? Everybody from the 504, what you think